From smack blasting to podcasting, welcome to the Sober Junkies podcast. My name's Jacob Neeson.
And I'm Sam Rad. And today we are having a conversation that I am thoroughly excited about. We are going to talk to a man very close to my heart that I've known virtually my entire life. You know, great guy, great role model. And we're just going to call him Sam. And that's about all we'll say. He is a successful businessman in the world today, and we don't want his personal identity being revealed to have a negative impact of any sort on his current business practices. So we're trying to keep this a bit confidential as far as who Sam is. But Sam was an Iranian-born human being, and after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, he was essentially smuggled out into India, where he went to school for a while, eventually went to Singapore, eventually was smuggled into Canada, and in Toronto, he ran a very successful law practice and also fell into smuggling drugs into foreign nations. And ultimately, he was arrested in 2004 in Tokyo with 26 kilograms of methamphetamine packed into 3 suitcases. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk to Sam today. So without further ado, I give you Sam.
Let's call him up.
Hello.
Hey, Sam.
Hi.
How's it going?
All right. How about yourself?
I'm well, thank you. So yeah, I know you're a busy man generally, so we appreciate you giving us some time to hear your story, which is very interesting. So if you could just start with just some, maybe like 5 minutes on your background, like where you grew up, how you ended up in Toronto, where you live now, and basically, you know, just 5 minutes up until there, then we'll talk about the really interesting stuff.
Sure. Well, I was born in Iran. I lived there till the age of 13, and because my father was an Iranian movie star, after the revolution, the government told him he cannot live in the country anymore, and they confiscated everything that we had. And because I was at an age that I would be automatically drafted to go to the army, we had literally 24 hours to catch the next flight out of the country to a country where the Iranian passport would not need a visa just to get out of Iran. So I ended up in India, and I went to school in India hoping to finish high school, which I didn't end up doing. I studied till grade 10, and then I was able to steal some report cards from the principal's office and forged the principal's signature and gave myself 2 other years worth of degree in grade 11 and 12, supposedly. And then I left India. I went to Singapore, hoping to come to Canada as an immigrant. That didn't work out. Found a human smuggler who prepared a Spanish passport for me, and because I could speak English, since I learned that in India, put me in charge of a single man and a mother and 4 of her children who could not speak a word of English. We were all given Spanish passports to travel with Swiss Air from Singapore to Canada as refugees, and it was all on me to bring them to Canada. Back in 1991, I landed in Toronto. I claimed refugee status with a grade 10 education. I went to a high school. I told them I have grade 12 equivalent from India. They allowed me to continue that in grade 12. First day of high school in new country and new city, Toronto, I got into a fight with a Jewish guy because he calls me fucking Iranian. So I let him have it. Then I stopped going to school on second day. And then I basically started to have multiple different jobs. My first job was selling chocolate cover almond door to door, making $1 on each box. I worked as a dishwasher, waiter, retail, salesperson, telemarketing, security guard, dispatcher of a limo company. I had a number of different jobs. And then I decided to go to school, York University. Of course, I needed a degree. So I swore in false affidavit that I have grade 12 education. Because I sounded smart, they gave me admission to go to York University. I attended York for 2 years. I found it boring because I then picked up an interest in fighting traffic tickets and going to criminal courthouse to defend people. From there, I went on hiring some people to write my essays for me and work to do at university level, $300 a paper, they guaranteed B+. That worked out for a while, but I thought I'm making more money doing something that I'm going to be doing after I get a degree for doing it. I said, screw university. I became a very successful paralegal. From then on, I went to become the president of Paralegal Society of Canada. I opened 3 major law firms in Toronto. I hired lawyers and other paralegals. And I was the first and only Persian-speaking paralegal in Toronto, having a very famous father help me in the Iranian community. I was extremely busy defending people in criminal courthouses and traffic ticket courts. And through my legal practice, I came to know a bunch of people who do a lot of illegal stuff. And then money was good. Gambling became my next best thing to do. Because I was making a shitload of money at my law office, I was losing twice as much in the casinos. And then my illegal clients kicked in, and that's how I got involved in smuggling drugs to make money to feed my gambling addiction and to maintain my lifestyle. So that's the nutshell.
So initially your objective selling drugs wasn't to be extremely rich. It was essentially to pay for your gambling habit.
That's right. So I was making about $3,000 to $4,000 a day in my law practice. I had a very successful paralegal office. So it wasn't, money was never a motivating factor for me. And I never sold drugs. I only carried drugs. So, and I was never wanting to become rich doing that because I was already rich doing something prestigious. It was, when you make $30,000 in half an hour playing blackjack, and the next night you end up losing $50,000, it becomes an addiction that doesn't show its face because you're constantly lying to everyone. No one knows that you're addicted. You're still maintaining a very luxury lifestyle. And to support the income for that type of win and loss of tens of thousands of dollars, the only thing that could have provided that much cash would have been accepting transferring drugs for drug dealers.
Were you making enough at your legitimate job to support your gambling habit at all, or were you making, I guess, were you losing more than you were making legally, or was it just barely breaking even in the end and just unable to pay bills then at that point?
Oh, no. My law practice was very successful. I was making more than enough to pay all my expenses, to go on trips with my wife to the Bahamas for the weekend just on a whimsical idea, and driving expensive cars and buying expensive watches and everything. And so that was all from my own income. Now, my own income also supported my casino losses. So the amount of money that I would be making from drug smuggling, if you will, was very minimal. It was never a big profit in relation to the amount of money I was making myself. So that wasn't a motivating factor. But I think as a gambler, I was addicted to taking risks. So that's basically what gave me an excitement. And if playing $2,500 a hand, 3 hands at a time, $7,500 cash on the table for 30 seconds of rush in blackjack would not do it, there would have to be a substitute to provide me that kind of rush or to top that type of a risk. So smuggling drugs through international borders was giving me that rush. It wasn't so much the money. And I've had some time to reflect on it. I didn't do this to make money to support my gambling addiction, even though it helped sometimes, but primarily the thought behind this, the motivating factor, unconscious motivating factor behind this was supporting what else can I do to have the pleasure of risk that is not everybody can do it. So for that reason, I would have never taken 500 grams of cocaine from place A to B. I would have never done a kilogram of whatever. It would have to be substantial that if I get caught, I'd walk into the prison with respect. Not that this guy just sold 200 grams of dope and he's here. It's just prestige was always important for me, prestige and image. So if I'm going to be caught, I might as well have that image associated with what I'm doing, that this guy is got balls to do what he did.
Yeah, if you're going to do something, you might as well go all the way.
Yeah.
And
again, that's the risk factor thing, right? If somebody's into bungee jumping, they try to find the highest cliff to do that.
Sure.
It's the risk factor.
We could probably make the analogy that if gambling at the blackjack table is marijuana, then, smuggling large amounts of drugs into foreign countries could be like the cocaine, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, over time, did this kind of snowball out of control, or did you fear for your life in any fashion?
It did snowball out of control. I fear for my life, and the last time that I got arrested in Japan was not so much that I did what I did because I needed money. It's because of my own work and my involvement with the police, not as someone who police has an interest in to investigate, but rather as friend of the court, of the criminal justice system. I was in possession of some information, which I ultimately shared with authorities. The word got around, and then threats started to come in, and I was already accustomed to smuggling drugs. So that's pretty much the snowball effect started from there. So a lot of people, in my opinion, who are good salespeople and who are addicted to taking risk and gambling or drugs and whatnot, they have a hard time saying no. And I think it's our inability to say no to someone or to seek help from elsewhere while you're involved in your own addiction, big sex or drugs or gambling, makes you do certain things that you can't reasonably and logically explain to a person, because logic and reason don't go hand in hand when it comes into taking those type of risks, whether it's shooting up or whether it's smuggling drugs or whether it's putting $15,000 as table max on a baccarat table. So because we can't say no, we can't say no to ourselves. And it is inability to say no to ourselves that get us in trouble, and it snowballs because you always are in fight with your inner self, simply because you believe your inner self never received the attention that it needs while you were growing up. So now you're trying to compensate what the psychologists call your id, the part of yourself that got neglected. So now you're trying to overcome that and trying to bury it by doing other things just to forget about the pain that you had. And that's basically my own self-analysis of myself led me to believe that about myself, which again, having been around people who've been addicted to either various substances, drugs, alcohol, or anything else, they share similar traits and thought patterns with me, and that's how I was able to see that in others and in myself.
Right. Yeah, I think Jake and I can both relate to that pretty thoroughly. And just to back up a little bit, so I just want to tell our audience that, yeah, your law practice was, in fact, very successful. You did have a billboard on Yonge Street in Toronto, like a $50,000 billboard. And Yonge Street is one of the longest streets in the world, or the longest street in the world, or something of that nature. Is that?
That's right, yeah. And that's part of what I did. And again, as a paralegal practitioner, where lawyers were starving, I could afford to have a billboard. I could afford to have my own TV shows on Persian TV programs, cinema advertising, bus benches, everything that I could put my face and name on. I pretty much did it because I could afford it, because it was bringing me money. I was the only paralegal in the city of Toronto that had my picture plastered on benches at four corners of intersection of every single courthouse in the city of Toronto. No first-time offenders or repeat offenders or lawyers could walk out of any courthouse in Toronto without looking at my picture. Imagine what it did for my business. So, yeah, so it was good. Money was good, and fame was great, and that's what I wanted. And when I went to the casino, I could not sit at a $25 table because it could not give me the fame that I wanted. It could not. No one would call me Mr. What can I do for you at a $25 table? But when I sit at a VIP table and have a reserved table, they would call me Mr. And it was the Mr. title that I was after. That's everything that I did was based on that image, because if I could portray to be successful, they believe I am, and I continue to be successful. And that was how it worked out. I was successful because I could portray that kind of image, and it made me to look successful, and I became successful.
Yeah, no casino is going to send a limo to pick somebody up so they can come sit at the $25 table.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, okay, so the first time you ever smuggled drugs into a country, how old were you, and what was it, and where did you go, and how did you do it?
The very, very first time, I think I was just maybe 22 years old. Someone gave me a tin of Nivea face cream, one of those blue color ones, and I think half of it was filled with 200 grams of Coke. And they told me, hey, if you're going to Singapore, can you take this and give it to a friend of mine? And I didn't know that I was going to be smuggling drugs per se. I thought, okay, I'm just going to do a favor for someone. I didn't even charge them. And I had no idea that if I do that in Singapore, and if I'm caught with 200 grams of cocaine, that they would execute me under 30 days. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. Again, because I didn't want to say no to people.
Yeah, it's interesting, the contrast between how different countries, treat those kinds of offenses. So, there you could have legitimately lost your life for something you were unwittingly taking part in. And it seems lucky that the time you finally did get caught, it was in a country that's definitely more lenient than Singapore. From that first time doing that in Singapore, how did it progress until you were finally, arrested in Tokyo, which was in 2003? Is that correct?
2004, February, I think, June 2004, June 16, 2004.
Okay. And so what, at 22 then in Singapore, what year would that have been?
1993, I think, 1993, 1994.
Was there times where you wouldn't do it for a long time and then do it again, or was it pretty consistent?
Oh, no, this was the only times. It was back then in the one I did in Singapore, and then fast forward, and that's when the Japan thing happened. In between, I didn't do anything of that sort because I didn't need to.
Right. It was only once the gambling got so out of hand that you basically went back to doing that. Okay. So during the long break between Singapore and Tokyo, did you break any laws? Have you ever done drugs?
No, I've never done drugs. I've never smoked. I drink alcohol, probably a glass of beer or wine every 2-3 months if the occasion arises. Never held a cigarette in my hand. And my only vice was gambling or taking risks or helping people take risks. When I explained earlier that in grade 10, I was able to steal report cards from the principal office and forge his signature to give myself a degree of grade 11 and 12, that goes to show you the mindset of a person in grade 10 of what I could easily do and break the law if I could get away with it. And that's pretty much how I had been, like, try to get away with things. Like I went and I bought a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, not that I needed one, but because I wanted to have one, not that I wanted to get arrested for it, but I wanted to have the opportunity that if I were to get arrested for having done something risky.
I remember you having that gun, vaguely.
Right. And again, my secretary knew where that gun was. And when I was in Japan and police executed a search warrant at my house, they knew exactly where to go without having to search for anything else. Go to my master bedroom, go to the walk-in closet, pick up my briefcase, retrieve the gun. She only knew exactly where it was. So again, that was another indication that I knew that she had ratted on me.
Right.
So I had that not because I was afraid of my life, but because I thought it'd be a cool thing to do. If I'm taking 26 kilogram of crystal meth across the border, I might as well have a gun too.
Right. That makes sense. You got to have a gun with the drugs typically.
Yeah, it solidifies your image as a real made man. Okay, so you basically run a successful, very successful law practice, and come 2003, 2004, you decide, okay, I'm going to smuggle drugs again. And okay, so can you tell us how that went about? It was on your third trip, you said, that you finally got caught, and the secretary you speak of for our listeners was working at your law office at the time, and she was the one who alerted authorities that you were coming in. So
That's
how did
right.
all that transpire? You said first you did a test run, and then yeah, if you could just tell us that story, the first couple times you went into Tokyo, and were you taking planes just directly from Toronto to Tokyo?
That's right. It was a direct Air Canada flight. And how I came to do the last bit of the drug smuggling to Japan, it wasn't to support my gambling addiction or my gambling losses, even though I'd lost a lot of money. The money that I was going to be getting from it was just to cover the expenses, such as paying for the airline ticket, the travel, the hotel, and compensating the girls who were carrying the drugs. So my own share would have been very, very minimal, so much so that I could have probably made at the casino over, half a day of gambling. The reason I took drugs to Japan this time around is because about 5 years prior to this, I had come to know of some information that someone was going to smuggle drugs, 4 kilograms of heroin, to Toronto from Germany, and they needed someone to carry it. So they had approached me, and I said, I won't do it. And they said, why? I said, well, there's too much risk. And I jokingly told them that you're not paying me enough. Now, these guys were some of my former law office clients. Now, because I wanted to make good with the prosecution and the police, I shared that information with a drug cop who I'd come to know through the court system. And because the offense was not going to take place in Canada, I figured nothing much is going to come out of it. So this drug cop calls his counterparts in Germany through Interpol, notifying them of a drug exchange being done in a hotel in Germany. And at which time the person who had the drugs on him in Germany, the 4 kilos of heroin, ends up getting busted. Now, in Canada, when you go to cops or in North America and you tell police something as a private informant, a confidential informant, your identity remains confidential. But no one had informed me or this copper that if you tell this information to German police through Interpol, your confidential informant's information means diddly fucking squat. So in Germany, in that guy's trial, my name comes up that this guy, we received the information from a guy named Sam in Toronto. So 5 years later, I get a call from this guy at my office. Says, Sam, this is me. Do you remember me, motherfucker? I said, who the fuck are you? He says, yeah, fucking 5 years makes you forget a lot of people.
Oh, God.
I'm like, holy shit, he's out. Anyway, so then he comes to me. Obviously, he claims the loss of money and loss of freedom. His wife was pregnant at the time. He missed the birth of his child. And he says, you got to do this couple of scores for me to be even, And we know you've done this before. We know you have the capability. You have the looks, appearance, and the prestige. So for that reason, you're going to do it. If you don't, we know where you and your wife and your newborn son live, and we will hurt you. Again, I call the cops, and the cop says, the best we can do is go arrest him. It's your word against his. It becomes hearsay, and they could get more angry if you rat on them again, and they could hurt you. I'm like, fuck, if the police can't help me, no one else can. And why do I want to make matters worse? I said, you know what, fuck, let's do it. And that's how my Japan story began, is to pay back the debts that they believed I owed them because of having ratted on them. And again, my secretary ratted on me, so karma was, in fact, the bitch that I didn't want to get to meet. And that's how everything went down. I didn't make any money, whether it was the dry run or the second run, the third run, I made nothing, $0. In fact, I even paid myself for my own trip. I just covered the cost of the girls, and it was money out of my pocket. I was just going to Japan, taking a risk. And I thought I could do it because I am hardwired to taking risks. So I thought, yeah, I could.
You said though the third trip, it was 26 kilos of meth that you ultimately got caught with. Even for that,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember you saying something about it being like $5,000 per kilo as far as a payment. How would that have broken down as far as like, you wouldn't have kept any of that?
No. If from all that $120,000-$130,000 that would have been mine per se, close to $80,000, little over $80,000, if it would have covered the expenses I'm paying the girls. And whatever would have been left over, if they would have paid me, if they had kept their word to pay me, would have probably just gone to the casinos or paid for one of my vacations or buy myself another expensive watch kind of thing. In fact, on the last trip, I had lost money because I had covered all the expenses for all the girls' trips, and I was supposed to recover that from the supposedly money that they were going to pay me back. But because I never got paid for the previous trips, this was a promise they'd made. I wasn't sure if I was going to get paid. So again, it was money out of my pocket. Had they paid me, yes, it would have been a good chunk of cash, but not all of it would have been mine. At that point, it was a business transaction. How much money can I make after paying my expenses, and how much profit would it be for me? And that's how I looked at it in order to justify doing it. And they said, you know what, you do the last score and they'll let you go. So that's how it worked out. I also have to backtrack. When the guy was released from prison, he told me that I owed him $400,000. And because he knew I was making money at my office, I agreed to pay him instead of doing the smuggling. So I paid him $150,000. He would come to my office every week and he would pick up $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 cash in an envelope. Then he told me that, fuck the rest of the $250,000, and it was getting too difficult to pay him. And then I agreed to do this to sort of compensate for the other $250,000 that I was supposedly owed him because of his lost shipment and loss of freedom.
So then for this guy, you do 2 trial runs and then the third run, or it was 1 trial run? And like, how much did you take in the first time and the second time? And then if you could tell us how you ultimately got caught the third time.
Okay. So the first time was a kilogram of coke. It was nicely concealed in Ziploc bags, air vacuumed, and I placed it inside coffee beans. I bought a kilogram of coffee beans, took out half a kilo, put the drugs in, put the rest of the coffee bean to school the dog. That's what I thought it was going to work, because that's what some of the Hollywood movies were professing that it would work. I arrived at Narita Airport in Tokyo. Customs officer says, open your bag. I opened my bag. He says, lift up your shirt, because I was wearing a baggy shirt. He thought maybe I had wrapped it around my body. I lifted it up. He checked out my nice six-pack, hairy body, and then that's it. He says, welcome to Japan. I said, fuck, thank you. Picked up the suitcase, and I totally was thinking that I'm Johnny Depp in the movie Blow. Pick up my suitcase, walk out of the airport, fuck you, customs. I just brought in drugs. Fuck, this is easy. I can do it, I said to myself. Come back to Canada, second run, 3 kilogram of coke, 3 kilogram of crystal meth, same method, pack it. I have Johnny Depp in my mind at all times. Maintain your smile, think of something else, go through customs. This time they didn't stop me, they didn't ask me, I walked through. Then I knew it's possible, and then I got this Russian girl involved who came to my office for a job interview to become my receptionist. And I didn't hire her as a receptionist because her Russian accent was so bad that none of my clients would have been able to understand what she was saying over the phone. And then I told her, listen, if you're desperate for a job, I'm taking Zafron to Singapore. Would you like to do it? I've done it 2 times before, and I'm going to give you $5,000. She said she was interested, and then I had myself a recruit. So I told her exactly what needs to be done. On the third time then I went with her, I didn't carry anything. She was carrying it. She walked through. I said, see, there's nothing to it. And at the fourth time, I figured we are going to do the same thing because we've done it 3 times, tried, tested, trusted it's going to work. But then I had underestimated my secretary and karma. So they combined together, and then I got caught.
I just want to backtrack a little bit. So how did this guy come up with this number of $400,000 being owed to him? Where did he come up with this?
I guess he just must have pulled it out of his hat. So he just says 400,000. He could have said 850,000. So I said, okay. I wasn't in a position to bargain. Like, really, that much? Like, how did you come up with that number? I said, okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. That's how pretty much it worked out.
So you were transporting, or telling the girls that you were transporting Zaffron. Did they have any clue? I mean, it would be kind of hard to just assume they had no clue what was going on.
Well, what one would think an intelligent person, and this is how it worked out. I see the girls on the night before departure at a coffee shop, and the next morning they show up in my hotel room where all the drugs are nicely packed, and I ask each one of them to sit in the, it was a suite, so I told them to basically sit in the living area, and I took each of their suitcases into the bedroom and conceal, or not conceal, but rather repack their suitcases and put drugs that are in coffee bean 1 kilogram bags in their suitcases. Now, that being said, I had also bought about 50, 60 grams of saffron from a Persian grocery store, and I had a small scale and some Ziploc bags sitting around so that when they walk into the room, they think I'm still busy packing saffron. So that's what they saw. So the perception, guys, this guy is fucking packing saffron. And I said, everything is already packed. This is just the leftover. So, and again, whether it was my smart to do that or not, and that's how I made them to believe it. And like, as I'm packing their bag, and I'm like asking them, are you guys sure you have no drugs? I know you guys smoke weed. You've told me that. Are you sure there is no traces of weed? Has this suitcase ever been around anything that you've been smoking or touching? Like, I made sure. I said, I don't want any drugs here. I don't do that shit. It's only saffron. So, and they were between the ages of 18 to 23. And when they see a guy with a business suit driving a Mercedes at law practice, asking all these questions and talking very confidently, and their own friend who had found them had just done a Japan trip and nothing ever happened, even if they were intelligent enough to believe something is going on, they had more convincing evidence to believe otherwise.
Right. I mean, was there a profile that you picked out, or like?
No, again, because I didn't pick them, I was willing to work with anyone who was willing to travel to Japan to carry saffron. And then the rest was up to me and how I would manipulate them into believing what I was telling them. So that's why in Japan they called me the mastermind of the operation. And I guess I was the mastermind of the operation because I made everything look so legit and so fine by directing everyone, telling everyone what they need to know. It's as if I'd hypnotized all of them to just believe me.
Yeah. So you had just found some useful idiots, essentially, is what you did.
Much.
You got them in there. And
yeah.
And this whole thing was basically just to protect your own personal well-being then in the end and your family.
That's right.
And for our listeners, too, that don't know or may be confused, saffron is a Persian spice that's worth a lot of money, apparently. I've heard some people say it's worth more than gold or something like that. I mean, do you know the particulars of how expensive saffron is in comparison to other things?
Yeah, well, a kilogram of saffron in a wholesale market when people import it from Iran, and Iran has the most expensive saffron in the world, it's about $1,000 a kilo. If you were to break it down into small containers and sell it for culinary purposes at grocery stores, it works out to be about $4,000 or $5,000 a kilo profit. So grocery stores or retailers would buy it in kilograms of it, and then they put it in small packages, and they sell it to people who are interested to use that for their culinary purposes.
Okay, so you get arrested because your, secretary calls the Japanese authorities and gives them the heads up, so to say, that you are arriving. And what happens from there then?
Well, that's where the story begins. And I'd love to get into the story, hopefully in the second episode, because I'm going to be taking you guys into from the time I arrived to Pearson Airport, having seen the drug cops from Toronto Police Force that I recognized because I had seen them in the criminal courthouses in Toronto, to being questioned by customs right at the gate, to the flight being delayed, to the Air Canada's telephones having been disabled, and Then I arrived 14 hours later to a foreign country where the conveyor belt area for Air Canada was separated from any other arrival. It was surrounded by at least 25, 30 black Labrador dogs. And then I get arrested and I go to the police detention center and I go to the Japanese detention center and then go to Japanese prison. I think that is worthy of perhaps another episode that I'll walk you through all that. And then hopefully I can talk to you guys for a third time, whereby it brings me 5 years later from having been incarcerated in a solitary confinement type of a cell in the Japanese prison, where I read more than 500 books, redefined myself, recreated myself, found my inner child, befriended myself, and came back to a life in Canada, still while incarcerated, and then I went to become another successful business person in the digital marketing world. That I think each of those two discussions are worthy of its own time slot. So if you guys agree, we could just maybe pause it here and then carry on the next two episodes so I can then have more time to answer more of those questions. So hopefully the complete 3 series will bring more insight into your listener's mind as to how one thing can lead into the other to get out of control. And at the end of all that, the listeners will then know that the ball is always in their court, the power is in their own hand. That doesn't matter how screwed up their life may seem to be at that time, but if they make one decision to turn it around, they can, because other people can and have done it, and I have done it, and they can take that with them and believe that everything that happens to you, regardless how horrible it is at the time, it's a blessing in disguise because it leads you to live a better life.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
You
that
think
sounds awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do a 3-parter then, which is great. And this has been, really interesting. Obviously, I think we're touching, topics in general that, I find fascinating, and a lot of the people I know personally do as well. So this has been a real treat, and we appreciate you putting aside some time in your busy schedule to speak with us. And, we'll look forward to talking to you again.
My pleasure to contribute and to make a difference in any way that I can. And if anyone has any other questions while listening to it specifically, I'm trusting that they can connect with you guys directly, have their questions ready, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions to either clarify the excitement for them more, or if there is anything confusing that they still want more clarification, I can answer those questions too.
Okay, that works.
Sounds good, man.
Perfect.
All right, we'll stay in touch. Okay.
Absolutely. All the best. We'll talk soon.
All right. Have a good night, man.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
Well, that was good.
Yeah, I guess it's a 3-parter.
So next time we'll bring you part 2, and the time after that we shall bring you part 3.
Yeah, I like it because it's going to be a cycle of events. There's different emotions of downs, ups. It's really interesting to see how somebody can be successful and then kind of go to a bottom, and then, like he says later on, come back up again and be this successful person. I think in his situation also you can empathize with somebody that was put into this unfortunate circumstance. Everyone just kind of assumes that drug dealers are by far the worst human beings, when it comes to the drug world.
Next episode, we will talk about Sam's 15-year prison term that he was sentenced to and how that transpired for him. And thank you for tuning in. Until next time.